Some discoveries feel impossible the moment you see them. Faces carved into stone by a people with no name. A buried structure shaped like a pyramid, but erased before history began. Patterns etched across entire deserts that only make sense from the sky. These aren't legends or fables, they're real artifacts. Traces of worlds that rose, vanished, and left behind mysteries too deliberate to dismiss and too silent to explain. For thousands of years they waited in darkness, preserved by sand, fire, and time, until the ground began giving them back. Tonight, we follow 7 relics that challenge everything we thought we understood about the ancient world. This is Riddle Me This Mysteries, where the past refuses to stay buried. Some mysteries don't greet you with ruins or writing. They begin with a face, carved where no face should be. In the northwestern deserts of Arabia, long before the rise of kingdoms, long before incense roots stitched the peninsula into the ancient world, someone shaped sandstone into human likeness. Eyes, brows, belts, blades, subtle pursed mouths, features carved with a precision that doesn't belong to the timeline we thought existed here. A region archaeologists once described as empty suddenly revealed expressions older than many civilizations that claim to define the ancient Near East. And yet nothing around them explains who made them. The first surveys that swept across AlUla in the early 2000s expected campsites, maybe scattered stone tools. Instead, the desert gave them people, or at least the idea of people, standing silently in the sand. Some of the stelae were small enough to hold in both hands. Others stood like sentinels, nearly the height of a person. Hundreds appeared across this vast landscape, each carved differently, but all recognizable as part of the same forgotten tradition. Their earliest makers lived in the mid-Holocene, somewhere between roughly 5000 and 4000 BCE, when the Arabian Peninsula was greener, wetter, and threaded with seasonal roots. This places the Stelae more than 1,000 years before the earliest recognizable cultural horizon in AlUla. Before Dadan, before Lihian, before any inscriptions were carved into the rock. What makes this early horizon even more striking is the craftsmanship itself. Even the oldest stelae show confident lines, controlled shaping, and deliberate design. Some figures wear carved daggers across their chest or belts with geometric patterns. Others have stylized eyebrows or carefully defined noses. These aren't idols made in haste. They are symbolic objects crafted by artists who understood their medium. And yet we still don't know what those symbols meant. A group of stelae found far to the southwest, in the Hema region, added a new layer to the story. In 2024, archaeologists documented 2 anthropomorphic stelae linked by a platform-like structure. Instead of standing alone in the desert, they were part of an architectural complex, a ritual space built with intention, alignment, and ceremony. This was not merely pastoral art. This was tradition. It raises a question the desert has avoided for decades. How much of the original landscape of the stelae is still buried? Remote sensing surveys across the Nafud Desert, stretching into AlUla's wider environment, revealed patterns visible only from the sky. Monumental structures forming pathways, corridors, and what researchers call funerary avenues. Long alignments of tombs and standing stones that connect across unimaginable distances. Evidence of ritual journeys or kinship lines in a world with no writing to record them. The stelae may have been markers along these routes. Guardians, ancestors, warnings, invitations. We only know they were meant to be seen. What deepens the mystery is that almost none of them stand where they were originally carved. Geochemical analysis shows that the sandstone used for many stelae came from quarries kilometers away. Someone shaped them, moved them, placed them with intention, and then at some unknown moment the tradition stopped. No gradual decline, no transformation into a later style, just silence. Centuries later, new cultures rose in AlUla. The Dadanites, the Lahianites, the Nabateans. They left inscriptions, temples, monumental facades, and tombs carved into rock. We know their names, we know the sound of their languages, but none of them ever wrote about these older faces in the sand. It is as if the people who carved the stelae belonged to a chapter even they had already forgotten. Modern teams working in AlUla describe it as a palimpsest, layer upon layer of human activity, each one overwriting what came before. And somewhere beneath those layers, beneath dunes and basalt flows, more stelae almost certainly remain. Some may still be standing, others lie buried in ritual spaces we haven't yet recognized. But the core mystery remains untouched. Who carved these faces? What did they believe? And why does their world, so carefully marked in stone, feel as though it vanished before history even noticed it existed? For now, All we have are eyes carved into the sandstone, eyes that look back across 6 millennia without revealing their story. But if these forgotten artists left us faces without names, the next mystery offers even less. What if Egypt built a pyramid so thoroughly that even the desert forgot it existed? Not buried, not ruined, but erased, stripped down to its foundation until nothing remained but a shape carved into the ground. A monument with no summit, no walls, no corridors rising toward the sun. A pyramid so quiet that for centuries, scholars weren't even sure it had ever existed. In 2008, that silence finally broke. Archaeologists clearing debris north of Teti's pyramid uncovered a rectangular rise of limestone blocks. It wasn't much, hardly more than the first steps of a vanished staircase. Yet the layout was unmistakable. The slope of the base, the orientation toward true north, the position of the enclosure wall, all of it belonged to a pyramid that no ancient historian ever recorded in detail, and that modern Egyptology had long been searching for. The team had rediscovered something once tall enough to dominate this corner of Saqqara, but now reduced to a foundation just a few meters high. What the winds revealed was not a ruin, but the ghost of architecture. Dating the structure placed it in the mid-5th dynasty, around 2400 BCE, when royal pyramids were still being built with precision and astronomical alignment. The orientation of the monument, consistent with other 5th dynasty pyramids, matched the Sun Temple patterns studied in recent architectural analyses. It also aligned with the northern pyramid field in a way characteristic of that period, not of later, more chaotic eras. This mattered because Egyptologists had been missing exactly one pyramid from this dynasty, the pyramid of the nearly forgotten king Menkaure Kayu. Menkaure is already one of the most shadowed rulers of the Old Kingdom. His statues are scarce, his inscriptions fragmented. His reign sits in a short and quiet moment between two much better documented kings. If he built a pyramid, it should have stood at Saqqara. Yet for generations it remained unlocated. Only a few ancient texts hinted that Menkaure was buried somewhere near Teti, but no trace had ever surfaced. And now, only the lowest tier of that pyramid remained, the head long gone. Everything above the base had been dismantled, block by block, likely during the Middle or New Kingdom, when later builders quarried older monuments for stone. The outer casing had been taken first, then the finer limestone, and eventually even the core blocks. What stood for centuries as a royal tomb was reduced to a platform no taller than a large doorway. The pyramid didn't collapse. It was harvested. The ground itself holds evidence of that erasure. The cut marks on the blocks, the missing foundation stones at key anchor points, the absence of a burial chamber where one should exist. Even the descending passage, normally the spine of every pyramid, is only partly preserved, swallowed by the sand. And perhaps most haunting, no name has ever been found inside the remains. No cartouche, no fragment of relief, no inscription that confirms who was meant to rest here. Without a name, the debate opened. Some scholars have suggested the monument might belong to a later king, perhaps Merikare, a ruler of the 10th dynasty, 1,000 years after Menkaure. But the architectural style doesn't match the later period. The block size, the leveling method, the enclosure layout, and especially the north-south orientation all point firmly to the 5th dynasty. What remains beneath Saqqara behaves like Menkaure's missing pyramid, even if time erased his signature. As archaeologists studied the site, more questions surfaced than answers. Why did this king choose a position north of Teti, away from the more prominent royal field? Why was his mortuary complex dismantled so completely that not even rubble remained? Why did his reign, once recorded in temple lists, fade almost entirely from Egypt's historical memory? Saqqara still hides the truth. Even in recent years, excavations just a short walk away have uncovered new tombs, like the 2025 discovery of the 4,400-year-old tomb of Prince Wazirifiri, sealed behind a massive pink granite door, proving the necropolis is far from exhausted. For every monument revealed, another still sleeps under the sand. The Headless Pyramid is one of those sleepers, a monument stripped of its walls, its treasures, and perhaps its very identity, but not its presence. Its shape endures, silent and grounded, like a scar in the plateau, a reminder that even the kings of Egypt could vanish so completely that only a shadow of their tomb remains. And while this pyramid lies low beneath the sand, our next mystery rises from a landscape far less forgiving. Deep in the rainforests of southern Nigeria stand stones covered in symbols that behave like writing, repeating patterns, structured lines, deliberate placement. But here's the problem. They don't belong to any known language on Earth. Hundreds of carved monoliths arranged with purpose, yet not one carries a story we can read. Who carved them, and why did their entire system of meaning disappear? As you move deeper into the Cross River region, the forest thins into quiet clearings, and in each clearing basalt pillars rise like guardians of a forgotten world. Some stare straight ahead, eyes carved wide and unblinking. Others wear belts, necklaces, or spiraling symbols, etched with a precision that suggests meaning, not decoration. And all of them stand exactly where their makers placed them more than 1,000 years ago. Archaeologists now trace their earliest origins to 450 to 600 CE, when iron tools first left recognizable marks on basalt in this region. These early stones are modest, single faces, shallow spirals, motifs still learning their own grammar. But from 600 to 900 CE, something changed. The carvers began shaping pillars nearly 2 meters tall, arranging them in deliberate clusters and covering them in symbols that behave like a system of communication. Many of the carvings repeat across different sites: concentric circles, stacked lines, patterned belts. The stones face in consistent directions. Certain motifs appear only on stones positioned at the edges, others only on central pillars. These patterns suggest rules, structure, intention. Yet here is the mystery. No city, shrine, or settlement large enough to explain this tradition has ever been found. A few monoliths appear later, into the 10th century, bearing refinements that show the tradition continued even as cultures shifted around it. And long after the carving stopped, people kept returning. Soil layers reveal ash, charcoal, and offerings placed around the stones between 1000 and 1800 CE. 1,000 years of rituals performed by communities who no longer knew the stone's original purpose, but still felt their power. The outside world finally learned of them only in the early 1900s, when colonial administrators recorded several sites. But true research began in the 1970s to the 1990s, when Nigerian archaeologists started mapping the stones and comparing their motifs. By then, many monoliths had already been moved, damaged, or lost. Then, between 2022 and 2024, new technology changed everything. High-resolution 3D scanning revealed microscopic chisel marks around the eyes and mouths, the signature of skilled artisans. Multispectral imaging detected traces of pigment, showing that at least some of the monoliths were once painted in red and black. And drone mapping uncovered something even more surprising. The stones are arranged in patterns repeated across multiple sites. Clusters of 3, lines facing east, tall central guardians surrounded by shorter ones, like chapters in a book we're still learning how to read. Some researchers have noted echoes between these symbols and Nsibidi, a much later symbolic tradition from southeastern Nigeria. The connection is unproven, but the resemblance suggests that the Ikom stones may preserve the earliest form of a symbolic system that survived only in fragments. Today, many monoliths lean or lie toppled. Others stand half-swallowed by forest. Nigeria is seeking World Heritage status to protect them, but time and erosion work fast in the rainforest. And still the stones watch. They hold meaning we can sense but cannot unlock, a message carved into basalt by a culture that left no name, no records, and no descendants to speak for it. Our next mystery sits beneath open sky, where the past left behind something far less symbolic and far harder to look at. The ground at Domuztepe is ordinary at first glance: pale soil, broken pottery, and the wind moving across an empty plain. Nothing suggests what lies beneath it. Nothing reveals the events the Earth had to absorb and keep hidden for more than 7 millennia. But once excavators reached the next layer, silence turned into evidence, and evidence into a ritual so structured it shouldn't have existed this early in human history. Long before cities rose from the Near Eastern plains, between 5500 and 5000 BCE, Domuztepe was already a sprawling settlement, far larger than anything normally associated with the late Neolithic. Recent obsidian provenance studies published in 2024 confirmed that its inhabitants were importing volcanic glass from Cappadocia, roughly 400 kilometers away. Archaeologists long suspected that Domuztepe held more than everyday life, that its quiet surfaces hid rituals no one had yet pieced together. That suspicion became unavoidable in 1996, when the soil gave up something far darker than anyone expected. While excavators were working the western side of the mound, they uncovered the first cluster of bones, scattered, broken, strangely arranged. At first, the pattern seemed accidental, but as digging continued, the shape of a deliberate structure emerged. A deposit containing the remains of at least 40 individuals, interwoven with ash, pigment, broken pottery, and stone tools placed with unnerving care. Radiocarbon dating later refined the timeline to 5300 to 5000 BCE. By then, the pit had become one of the earliest known examples of ritualized human processing in the ancient Near East. The bones revealed their story slowly. Many long bones had been broken when still fresh, cracked intentionally rather than fractured by time. Others showed fine cut marks, the kind left by slow, careful slicing, consistent with defleshing or mortuary preparation. Burn patterns indicated that parts of the pit were exposed to controlled fire. Soil chemistry revealed traces of ochre mixed into the layers, a sign of ceremonial activity performed around or above the deposit. Nearby, archaeologists uncovered evidence of feasting: butchered animal bones, ash-filled pits, and ceramics intentionally broken during the same sequence of events. Nothing about it was chaotic. It was measured, structured, repeated. A 2025 analysis of the lithics found in the pit showed that the stones were not refuse. They were chosen tools, deliberately deposited among the human remains. Some still bore microscopic residues from the activities performed during the ritual itself. They were part of the ceremony, not separate from it. The deeper the excavation went, the clearer it became that this was not a cemetery. It was not a battlefield. It was not a catastrophe. It was something else, something rehearsed over time, shaped by belief, and carried out by a community whose thoughts about death and identity do not survive in any written or oral tradition. Interpretations vary. Some scholars argue this was a form of secondary burial, where bodies were processed after decomposition as part of a long ritual cycle. Others propose ritualized violence, not as punishment or warfare, but as a symbolic act embedded in the community's worldview. A few suggest the pit was reopened repeatedly, each time adding new material, a sequence of ceremonies layered atop one another. Yet the central question remains untouched. Why would a community living centuries before the rise of urban society engage in practices so elaborate, so intentional, and so emotionally charged? Domuztepe offers no explanation, only fragments, only patterns, only evidence that the people who lived here understood life and death through a system of meaning that has not survived. Today, most of the pit rests under protective covering, shielded from weather that would erase what little is left. The bones have been documented, analyzed, and studied, but the beliefs behind them endure in silence. Domuztepe remains one of the earliest and clearest reminders that human complexity did not begin with cities or writing. It began much earlier, with rituals that made sense only to the people who performed them. Where Domuztepe shows a community wrestling with death, the next site reveals AlUla prepared for eternity, a transformation recorded not in violence but in jade. Some discoveries feel expected, the quiet collapse of bone, the soft surrender of time, but not this one. This one waited. Far beneath the jungle canopy of southern Mexico, deep inside Calakmul's towering structure too, archaeologists opened a chamber sealed since the late Classic period. As stone shifted and air escaped, the room exhaled a breath it had been holding for more than 1,000 years. Dust hovered in a stillness so complete it felt ceremonial, as if even the air remembered what had been performed here. And in the center of that untouched silence lay a face. It was not the face the individual was born with. It was the face crafted for their eternity, a mosaic mask of jade. Torchlight revealed what the darkness had preserved. Tiny green tesserae carved to impossibly tight tolerances, their edges smoothed where ancient fingers had fitted them into the contours of cheek and brow. The eyes, once inlaid with shell and obsidian, had dimmed but not died. Beneath the mask, cinnabar pooled across bone, its iron-rich red marking rebirth in Maya theology, a symbolic vessel for the life force returning to the underworld. Earlier scholarship had long suspected jade carried meanings deeper than prestige, but it wasn't until 2023, when a comprehensive study of elite Maya burials was published, that patterns began to solidify. Jade was breath, maize, cyclical renewal, the material embodiment of divine resurrection. Mosaic masks, it turned out, were never decorative. They were reserved for the highest tiers of authority, rulers tied to the Snake Dynasty's fierce political world, where marriages, betrayals, and alliances carved the history of the Maya lowlands. Whoever lay beneath Structure 2 was embedded in that world of shifting loyalties. And yet Calakmul's scale was still widely underestimated. That changed in 2024, when LiDAR scans pierced the canopy and erased centuries of misinterpretation. The data revealed a megacity, elevated causeways radiating outward, residential districts sprawling across ridges, administrative courts arranged with engineered symmetry, and defensive walls disappearing into the surrounding forest. Calakmul was not merely a ceremonial center. It was a capital of geometric order and political reach. The tomb inside Structure 2 was only one piece of a much larger choreography of power. Then, in 2025, a synthesis of Jade cosmology and funerary reconstruction reframed the mask with unsettling precision. This was never meant to resemble a human portrait. It was a cosmic template, a face shaped according to theological geometry, aligning the deceased with the ordered universe. The mask was an instrument of transformation, granting the dead the perfected features required to re-enter the eternal cycle of breath, maze, and rebirth. But the mask protects a paradox. We can read its symbolism, we can map its city, we can reconstruct the world it belonged to, yet we cannot name the person it encased. The inscriptions near the chamber are broken, the lineage glyphs eroded to fragments. The bones bear markers of elite life but no definitive identification. A figure at the heart of one of the most powerful Maya kingdoms stands before us in pristine jade, and yet remains absent from the written record. A flawless face without a biography. A ruler rebuilt in mineral perfection, but unremembered. A life framed with ceremony and reverence, yet stripped of its name. And this face, carved for one ruler alone, stands in stark contrast to what comes next. A place where the past didn't preserve the dead, but reassembled them. Before the peat-dark bones were fully uncovered, archaeologists noticed it, the jaw resting too neatly on a skull it had never belonged to. And that was only the beginning. Cladh, Hallan, a small Bronze Age settlement on South Uist in the Outer Hebrides, had never been considered a place of grand secrets. Its houses were modest, its settlement pattern ordinary. But in 2001, as researchers examined the compacted floors of two roundhouses, they encountered burials positioned with such deliberate care that the scene felt almost staged. Still, nothing about the arrangement was remarkable until the radiocarbon dates returned. The woman buried beneath one floor had died sometime between 1130 and 980 BCE. But her skull came from a different woman who died at least 3 centuries earlier, and her jaw belonged to yet another individual altogether. Every test widened the chronological gap. Every bone contradicted the next. The second burial, the so-called male mummy, only deepened the unease. His skull dated to 1600 to 1450 BCE, his torso to 1440 to 1290 BCE, his legs to 1300 to 1120 BCE. 3 lives, 1 body, a single person assembled across half a millennium. What emerged was not an accident of preservation, it was intent. By the early 2020s, patterns across the Outer Hebrides had suggested long-term ancestor veneration. But it wasn't until 2023, when new analytical work was published, that a clearer framework formed. The Cladh Hallan bones showed signs of peat bog preservation, tissues artificially slowed in decay, bones absorbing the chemistry of stagnant, oxygen-poor pools. They had been treated, scraped clean, wrapped, dried, and kept above ground for decades, even centuries before burial. Then, in 2025, a comprehensive monograph on the site's full occupation sequence revealed the larger picture. These composite bodies were not random jigsaw puzzles of the dead. They were curated lineages, ancestral representatives constructed from multiple forebears, each bone selected, each joint aligned, each component contributing something of the household's remembered past. This was mummification, but not as Egypt or Peru defined it. It was not about preserving one person. It was about preserving continuity. The people of Cladh Hallan lived with these mummies. They built homes over them, lit hearths above them, raised children a meter above ribs that had been assembled before their grandparents were born. This intimate proximity, daily life unfolding directly over the composite dead, forces a different view of identity. The 2025 analysis put forward a compelling hypothesis. Identity in this community was collective, not singular. A family line could be embodied in a single constructed ancestor person, an assembled being who carried the memory of many individuals. Even burial was not an end, but a closing ritual. These bodies were curated, maintained and repositioned for generations before being placed beneath the floors of the homes where their descendants cooked, argued, mourned and slept. In Cladh, Hallan, the past wasn't gone. It was literally underfoot, stitched together, protected and kept present in the quiet architecture of everyday life. The next mystery forces the opposite. You must step back until the landscape itself forms the pattern beneath you. No one standing on the sand could have built this. You have to rise above the desert, high enough to watch the world flatten into lines before the shapes begin to appear. Across the Middle East, the Caucasus and the great empty plateaus of Central Asia, massive stone constructions stretch for kilometers. Long, tapering walls run like spears across the desert floor, converging into broad circular enclosures. Some span a few hundred meters. Others are so immense they take hours to walk around, their outlines dissolving the moment you step inside them. Today we call them desert kites, a modern name for designs conceived by ancient engineers whose ambitions still feel impossible. Their age pushes deep into prehistory. In Jordan, excavated examples reach back to the pre-pottery Neolithic, nearly 9,000 years ago. In northern Arabia, newer survey work places many kites in use through the 6th and 5th millennia BCE. Farther east, in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan and the Caspian steppe, regional variants extend into the Bronze Age, adapted to grassland horizons rather than open desert. But despite their spread across continents, and despite thousands now mapped, not a single inscription or surviving myth explains why they were carved into the earth. For much of the 20th century, scholars assumed a simple purpose: hunting. The long walls funneling animals into a killing field, a practical system engineered by necessity. Then drones arrived. Between 2022 and 2023, archaeological teams in Jordan's eastern Badia flew hundreds of sorties, producing the most complete aerial surveys to date. The results overturned old assumptions. Some kites stretched over 5 kilometers. Others had branching corridors, multiple pens and carefully controlled entry points, too structured, too consistent to be improvised traps. If these were hunting systems, they were engineered with astonishing foresight. And then came the carvings. In 2023, researchers studying northern Arabian petroglyphs found rock-cut images that mirrored kite layouts almost exactly, miniature architectural plans etched by Neolithic hands, scaled, measured, intentional. These weren't chaotic drive lines. They were monumental constructions planned on stone and then transferred to the land at staggering scale. Work published in 2024 pushed the interpretation even further. At Har Zuriaz in the Negev, archaeologists documented kites embedded within a ritual landscape, surrounded by altars, marked stones and pathways that led not toward hunting grounds, but toward ceremonial terraces. The placement suggested meaning beyond subsistence, territorial markers, communal gathering sites, symbols of identity, or cosmological diagrams drawn into the desert itself. Then came 2025, and with it the most ambitious dataset yet, global kites. Thousands of structures, mapped from Syria, Jordan and Saudi Arabia to Armenia, Azerbaijan and Uzbekistan, revealed a distribution that followed ancient migration corridors, seasonal water routes and highland passes. The pattern hinted at shared knowledge across cultures separated by mountains, languages and millennia. A technology, or a symbol system, that spread wider than many ancient empires. But the mystery refuses to settle. Stand among the stones and none of it holds together. The walls are low. The wind erases their outlines. The shape dissolves as soon as you step inside it. From the ground, the kites feel random, as if built for a viewpoint that no human could have had at the time. But rise, even a little, and the desert resolves into geometry. The lines sharpen, the purpose whispers. These ancient builders created something meant to be understood from above. Too vast for a single generation, too quiet for inscription, too deliberate to be chance. A message written into the earth itself, left for whoever could finally see it. These 7 mysteries remind us that the ancient world rarely behaved as expected. People carved meaning into stone, shaped landscapes at impossible scales, and left behind traces that still resist every answer we try to give them. And somewhere beyond these ruins, more stories are waiting, buried, silent, unfinished. If one of them stayed with you, let it travel. Like the video. Subscribe if you haven't. The search continues, here on Riddle Me This Mysteries.